can't actually unmute his microphone at the moment, so he will call me if he wants to speak, and I'll relay that on.
Okay, that's fine.
Is that okay?
Is he able to comment in the comment box as well at all? Obviously, you can write in that as well,
Yeah.
in the chat box if there's anything. Okay, great. So could I ask that the recording of the meeting is now started?
It started, Councillor Dawn.
So good evening and welcome everyone to this meeting of the Villages Local Partnership, which is being held remotely and also being recorded. Before moving on to the agenda, can I ask the clerk to do a roll call of the members present, please?
Thanks, Councillor Dawn. The members in the meeting tonight are Councillor Bibby, Councillor Binks, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Andy Doig, Councillor Audrey Doig, Margaret Dundas, James Fletcher, Ross Anderson, Meg Gilzane, Councillor Hood, Nigel Hobbs, Stirling McGee, Councillor James McLaren, Reverend Gary Noonan, Linda O'Malley, Councillor Sheridan, Neil Thompson, yourself, Councillor Natalie Dawn, and David Blair.
That's great. Thanks, Elaine. We can now move on to the agenda. So, yeah, I formally welcomed you all, but just want to say welcome again to the Villages Local Partnership, the first of 2021. It's really nice to see. I can only see 9 of you at the moment, but it's great to have you all here anyway. So we'll just get started. Do we have any declarations of interest? No, I'm not. No, I'm not seeing any. That's fine. And any apologies? Don't believe we do.
Sorry, Councillor Dawn, just to say I received apologies from John Anderson, Sandy Clark, Brenda Whitelaw and Councillor Dowling.
Okay, thanks, Elaine. All right, so item 1, it's just the minute of the last meeting. So before we go on to agree the minute, I just wanted to draw your attention to some matters arising from it. So at item 1B and C, which is page 7, it speaks about at the last meeting where we discussed whether funds could be rolled over because of either Christmas light switch-ons that couldn't go ahead or events that couldn't go ahead. We asked if it would only be fair for that money to go over to the next financial year, which obviously doesn't usually happen. However, given the circumstances, we have sought clarification on this, and I have something that I just want to read out for you. So in light of the circumstances surrounding the COVID pandemic and the ongoing revisions to the Scottish Government's COVID route map, approval is given to carry forward to financial year 2021/22 from the General Fund 2020-21 programme that any grants awarded for projects which are unable to be delivered in the financial year to March 31st, 2021, any balances arising from grant awards returned due to the inability to deliver the project as expected, or any residual programme balances currently unable to be awarded, in this case to be ring-fenced for festive events specifically. The award of any residual sums must be considered as early as practicable in financial year 21/22 to support communities over the period of recovery from COVID. So that has been agreed to roll forward where it's applicable. So I think that's only right, and it's good given the circumstances from our local groups. So I would be asking, I'm not sure if any of the officers want to come in on this, just to provide some clarification around that. Annabelle, I'm not sure if you want to come in.
Yeah, I'm happy to, Councillor Don. So essentially this gives a bit of flexibility for projects that might have a disruption in their spend this year, and also to roll forward that unallocated balance. I think one of the things that has definitely been discussed at this local partnership and others is the importance that where grant applicants receive funding and there's a change to what they deliver, that they need to notify council officers of that. That's part of the grant condition. So it does allow a little bit of flexibility. but I will be contacting all grant applicants just to remind them that if there is a variance in timescale or what funding needs to be spent on, to contact us and to get that variance kind of approved through the local partnership in line with our grant conditions, really. So I think it will be welcome flexibility for groups, but just to keep us in the loop wherever possible is much appreciated.
Thanks, Annabelle. So before I move on to ask agreement for that, I know, Audrey, you've got your hand up.
Yes, it was just to say apologies from Councillor Emma Rodden, but Elaine's, I wrote it in the question box and Elaine's acknowledged that she'll put them in.
Sorry, I thought it was in relation to this. I did see that. And I think, Meg, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, trying to unmute myself. Just to confirm, obviously Bridge of Weir Festival got money for Gala Day and the Santa Sleigh. Now, funnily enough, Gala Day couldn't happen in July, or June rather, May, whenever the hell it is. I can't remember what was last year. We did manage to do something for Santa Sleigh through the villages over 6 nights, so we're waiting on the receipts coming back. It was just to confirm that we're going to be allowed to carry forward the money that we've got to go towards a potential Gala Day for 2021. Obviously, if we don't get to hold Gala Day in 2021, we will then hand the money back. Is that what my understanding to be correct?
Yeah, I would say so, Meg. I think that's what we're trying to set out. I would need to obviously get you to clarify or discuss it with the officers just to confirm that and work out. But yeah, I believe that's what this is for. Anything, obviously, it was kind of related to Christmas lights, but anything that's been affected by the pandemic. So that's fine. No other questions, so are we happy to agree the minute and agree just that extra note?
Agreed.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll just move on to item 2. I really just wanted to kind of say that I was really pleased with the results of the Celebrating Renfrewshire participatory budgeting programme. And I think it's a really positive thing. I think that it's great that we've got young people in our area voting on things that matter in our area. And I think that as a local partnership, we need to do everything we can to encourage participation in this going forward and encourage local groups who could utilise this, because we have lots of them in our villages. So it would be good to see that going forward. I'll bring Annabelle in briefly on this.
Thanks very much, Councillor Don. You'll just see just a couple of things to draw local partnership members' attention to in the paper. You'll see there's a couple of variances that we've added to the paper just to give the local partnership members sight of where groups have amended their application, but it's still considered that the changes are in the spirit of the application. And that's exactly what I mean by in terms of reporting variances to officers, so we can escalate that as appropriate. There's a balance there that's unspent, which you'll see, and Councillor Don has just covered how that will be carried forward. There is also an unspent balance for Celebrating Renfrewshire there of around 14k, which is quite a significant amount of money. I need to get some clarification on the governance arrangements for that, because it's agreed that it will be distributed by participatory budgeting. So I'll report that back to the local partnership as much as I can. But as you can see, there's been a significant amount of flexibility applied. So I wouldn't imagine that funding would be lost by any stretch of the imagination. And we're working with Renfrewshire Youth Voice around what some of those proposals might be. As Councillor John pointed out, the Celebrating Renfrewshire participatory budgeting exercise was quite a significant achievement. I understand there's a reduction in the number of young people who were participating as compared to last year. I'm sure you can imagine how that came to be as we delivered this in September 2020. Just really credit to the teams, and particularly youth services, who pulled this off, because my understanding is that this was the only participatory budgeting exercise that was done in Scotland in 2020 because of some of the constraints. So pleased we still managed to distribute some of that funding, even if not all of it, for this local partnership. And I guess just to reiterate that those communications will be made about those flexibilities, but really important that we stay in touch about what the variance is, so I can keep the local partnership abreast of the budget monitoring situation and what's being delivered for the funding that you have allocated. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Annabelle. Sorry, I had a little freeze there. That's great. Does anybody have any questions on that report? Sorry, Audrey.
It's great to see that we were able to do something as a first again in Renfrewshire. I don't think a lot of our firsts get recognised a lot of the time, but that's great. I have a wee suggestion though, Natalie, and it might be something that the officers could take forward. I don't know if it would be allowed or not, but in the villages area, there must be still children that don't have adequate computers or iPads to do their at-home learning. Could some of the money that's within that budget be maybe allocated to help buy the computers or the iPads for these children to do better home learning?
I would need to ask one of the officers to come in on that.
Oliver, are you happy for me to take this?
Yeah, sorry, I was I thought you were going to, but I'm happy either way. But I think if you take it initially, and I can chip in if necessary.
Yep. I think it's a really good suggestion. The thing I need to check is just that the kind of authority, as it were, to distribute the funding says it needs to be done by participatory budgeting. So just need to check that out with colleagues and governance really to see whether the local partnership can distribute the money through your standard grant mechanisms or whether it would need to be a participatory budgeting exercise. But I would say that if you do have suggestions around how it could be used locally, please do kind of get in touch and we can explore that with local groups as well to make sure that that's factored in whatever the governance route then turns out to be.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I would add to that is that part of the issue with devices is just getting hold of the devices at the moment in terms of delays in the procurement processes around those, because they're just not getting into the country, and because councils the length and breadth of the country are trying to do exactly that as well, and you know, through the normal routes. So but yes, we would need, as Annabelle says, to check the governance in terms of whether or not we can effectively transfer from a PB budget pot, participatory budget pot, into the mainstream funding pot, grant funding pot, to be able to do that. Okay.
Thank you. If we could double check that, because that would be something really positive if that could be done. James, I think you had a question.
Thank you. Following on from what Oliver was saying, it does appear that there seems to be a problem in actually distributing the digital devices, laptops or whatever. My records say that Renfrewshire's received 1,800 laptops, but not actually had them delivered yet. So maybe an update on that. And if we've got laptops that haven't been delivered, then maybe that money doesn't actually need to go that way from this partnership.
I certainly wasn't aware of the fact that laptops had been received and not distributed. I know Children's Services have had quite a programme of distributing laptops and other devices, Surface devices, iPad type devices out to the people that needed them. But certainly we can follow that up and see what the position is.
Yeah, we can certainly get an answer to that, James. Meg, I think you had a question. Hands up. Oh, sorry, I saw your hand up. And we've got David.
Hi there, folks. Hopefully you can hear me all right. Yeah. Yep, good. My question was on the participatory awards that we've just been discussing there. And last year, I recall there was a question raised about multi-grant applications. and there was some concern that an organisation might need £2,000 and applied to more than one local committee and got awarded £2,000 from more than one, so actually got more than they applied. Was that issue rectified this year? Because I see there are a number of multi-awards in there for the same amount.
So in terms of the participatory budgeting, that wasn't decided by the partnership. That was voted on by local young people. You'll obviously see the section before that where we gave out the grant given, and there was we did take into account
Sorry. Yeah, it's particularly the participatory one that it came up on last year when we had a presentation on it. That was one of the challenges that this group raised, was there was a risk in that fund that organisations were applying to all but only actually needed funding from one to meet their funding requirements. And that was to be looked at, so I was just wanting to know whether that actually was looked at or not.
Okay, I'll need to bring in, I think, Annabelle or perhaps Oliver. I'm not sure if you would rather answer.
Sorry, no, it would be Annabelle would be closer to this in terms of the mechanics of it. I'm certainly, yeah, Annabelle.
Thanks. Thank you. Yes, so it remained this year certainly that organisations could apply to more than one local partnership for both within the general grant fund and also in participatory budgeting. The principle in the grant conditions remains the same in both, which is that you can apply to more than one area, but that should be distinctly for something within that area. So that's what the guidance says. So you could, in theory, apply to all 7, but each of those grant awards should be freestanding. What you wouldn't be able to do with our application is apply for, say you needed £2,000 in total, apply for 2,000 for exactly the same thing across all 7 and end up with £14,000, if that makes sense. So the application should be for the project cost. And then in some cases that should be split between local partnerships where maybe delivery is in multiple local partnership areas. The practice of how people and how organisations apply remains reasonably varied, and the extent to which organisations apply the guidance to their applications, I would say, is varied in practice, but certainly in terms of applications you can apply to more than one, but it should be for activity within that local partnership discreetly, and it should be freestanding as well.
Thanks, Annabelle. All right, so we don't believe we have any more questions. Are we happy to agree that report? Yep, agreed. Brilliant.
Agreed.
Right. Thank you. So we are just moving on to item 3, which is a presentation, and I will pass over to Annabelle for this one.
Thanks again, Councillor Don. I am now going to try and share my screen. Hopefully this will be successful, but please bear with me. Okay. Okay, you should be able to see my screen now. Sorry, my computer's being very slow here.
Yeah, we can see that.
That's
now.
it.
Good, marvellous. Thanks very much. So I guess apologies in advance to any elected members that might have seen bits of this at previous local partnerships, or indeed may see it again at other local partnerships. I am presenting on 2 screens, so what I can't see is I can't see the questions. So happy to take questions at the end, of course, but if there are questions that come up alongside, please don't think that I'm ignoring them. I just can't see the message thread of the meeting. Just let me move that. So this presentation is really just to give the local partnership an update on the community impact assessment that's currently being carried out to explore the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic across Renfrewshire. What I'm going to share today, some of those findings were interim findings from this piece of work that have already been reported to Council in December, so elected members may well be familiar with that. But I also want to present a bit more hot off the press data for discussion within the local partnership too. There are two purposes, I guess, of this presentation before I start. One is to get your views as elected members and community members about whether the types of impacts that we're reporting through the community impact assessment are things that you recognise within the villages' communities. Are they the same? Are they different? And the other one is, as Councillor Don mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, it may well be that some of this information, or just generally the experience of our communities during COVID-19, may wish to influence the local priorities that the partnership had previously identified. I guess recognising that we live in a significantly different world than we did when they were set. So the recognition, of course, that COVID's had a really significant impact on people across Renfrewshire, and the community impact assessment is essentially an assessment of the evidence to inform a social renewal plan for Renfrewshire. There is a tension, as I'm sure you're all familiar, between the kind of immediate response to the pandemic, but also trying to work on what recovery might look like for the area. And it's hoped that the community impact assessment will inform some of this recovery planning as well. There are three kind of key elements of the community impact assessment. So one is a data exercise, so looking at service demands, national and local data. Another is a kind of listening event arm, and Alan McNiven's here tonight and has been engaged in facilitating a lot of that work, which is essentially talking to people to understand that richer data around what people have experienced. And this discussion with local partnerships is a really important part of that piece of work as well. And the third arm is a survey, something called the Public Services Panel, and that's the data that I want to present tonight, which gives a survey snapshot of what people are saying across Renfrewshire. That is separated by local partnership area, so we can look specifically at what the responses from the villages said in this piece of work as well. So I guess just to start by giving some of the headlines around some of the data exercise. So this was an early data exercise to look at what some of the initial impacts might be. This is what was reported to Council back in December. There have been, as of the 12th of January, it's obviously higher now. There were 7,381 positive cases of COVID in Renfrewshire, and tragically 512 deaths. As I said, that will be higher now. One of the biggest areas of impact that we've seen is around our economic impact, so employment and both support for businesses. So we saw an 80% increase in universal credit claimants between March and October in Renfrewshire. At furlough's peak in August, 28,000 people-ish were registered with the furlough scheme, dropping to 8,800 people at the end of October, and continued uncertainty around what the future of furlough might look like for people and the impacts of that. And in Renfrewshire, we were paying out 28.5 million of grant support for over 2,500 businesses. So that just, I guess, brings to life in numbers some of those impacts and what that looks like locally. Looking at some of the service data that we've got to give an initial sense of demand, there's been an increase in crisis grants, up by about 30%. A number of contacts around advice works. Would say that's initially quite slow, that contact for advice, but it's now starting to really ramp up as people start to get a sense of their economic situation, and I guess some of the difficulties start to bite. Some concerns around fuel poverty specifically, with a lot of organisations increasingly focusing on the distribution of fuel vouchers and top-ups. And I guess to use a couple of examples of community organisations that are operating in a more pan-Renfrewshire way, the Food Bank continued to provide support to quite a significant number of people across Renfrewshire, 3,148 adults and over 1,000 children. This is broadly in line with previous years, but what I would say about Renfrewshire is we have quite an extensive network of organisations that have started providing community food as a response to financial insecurity within our communities. So while the food bank numbers haven't significantly gone up, that's certainly not indicative of the levels of food insecurity. If you use Star Project just as an example, they had 350 visits to their pantry in 2019-20 and had already provided over 6,000 supports to date in 2000. So really skyrocketing demand around some of these emergency crisis type supports for people in financial difficulty. In terms of the council and partners, we set up a number of neighbourhood hubs aligned to our local assistance team, working to connect people with local organisations when they do call the national helpline or the local shielding helpline. They've now dealt with over 700 referrals since being set up in April, quite a low number in the village's local partnership area, only about 56 in the village's local partnership area. We've also been working through the hubs with programmes such as Connecting Scotland to get digital devices. The Connecting Scotland programme is a Scottish Government and SCVO programme, and they've been working in partnership with us to distribute devices to target groups, and data and digital champion support, I should say. And over 1,200 devices have been distributed in Renfrewshire as part of that programme to date, but it rolls on with a number of different target groups. You'll all be very familiar about the impact of poorer health and wellbeing on our health and wellbeing services ultimately. So service waiting times rising as the NHS and social care respond to the pandemic. And national surveys saying to us that 25 to 28% of people wouldn't contact a GP at this time about something that wasn't related to COVID, and between 53 and 59% of people saying they feel lonely some, most, or almost all of the time. And also some national data telling us that the impact of COVID restrictions and that wider context having a link to rising alcohol and drug use in our communities as well. So in response to some of this national picture that we've been building, what we wanted to do was try and get a sense of the extent to which that is resonating in Renfrewshire. So the Public Services Panel is a engagement tool that the council has used for a number of years, but there was a specific panel put together for looking at the impacts of COVID. So financial and income worries, family issues, mental health and wellbeing, digital inclusion, and to try and get a snapshot of those behaviours and attitudes from a local perspective. So the way that the panel works is that there's a panel of 1,500 people, and then they are a set number of people as opposed to a consultation, so where you go out on social media and you say, respond to my survey, and there's questions were distributed to those. And as such, we currently have kind of 59% return rate of that, which is about just under 900 people. So what I wanted to talk to you all about tonight was, I guess, some of those interim results that we're starting to see from those survey responses. It's really important that I point out that they are interim responses, so the responses are still coming in and this piece of work isn't finalised. So please do take what I'm saying with a pinch of salt, but I hope that it is enough to provide some meaningful discussion and insight about what some of the final results might be. So as I said, it's not the full results from the panel. It's intended to give that initial steer and discussion. There's about 200 responses from this local partnership area, and we'll be doing some targeted work as well to encourage response rates for particular groups as well. It's quite a big survey. I will touch on some of the Renfrewshire responses where they're kind of in parallel, where there might be differences for the villages specifically, and there's a set of questions where I'll let you see a bit of comparison between local partnerships. It's a lot of graphs, but I promise I will try and talk about them in a clear way as much as possible. If there's more questions about some of the questions or responses, I'll do my best to try and answer those as well, of course. So I guess this is a really important question. That's where I wanted to start, which is what has affected you the most during the coronavirus pandemic? And the stats that are there on the left of that slide are Renfrewshire wide, but are very much the same picture across all the areas. So 63% of people in Renfrewshire saying they're worried about their own or their family's future, 38% saying they're worrying about how to support family and friends, 35% worrying about health treatment that's needed, and 29% saying they're feeling social isolation or feeling lonely. I'll just see if I can get my little laser pointer up. Ooh. Okay. This graph here on the right, I'm not sure whether you can see the stuff on the left there, but essentially the bars there in blue are the villages and the bars there in right are Renfrewshire, so you can see a bit of comparison between the two. They are broadly the same. There's not huge disparities between responses from the villages and across Renfrewshire. One pattern that you will see through a lot of all these slides is that the answers for the villages area are overall much more favourable than the other parts of Renfrewshire. And that's a pattern that you can see here in this particular question and a number of others. But as you can see, you know, those areas of concern remain the same in the villages as they do in other areas, so health treatment, worrying about others, social isolation. So the same big ticket items for this area as the rest of Renfrewshire. Another Renfrewshire wide one for you. Which of the following things are currently major worries for you? So what are people really worried about at the moment? Again, this probably won't surprise you. It's pretty straightforward. 73% saying they're worried about friends or families become seriously ill with COVID, 50% becoming seriously ill themselves. But you can see there that economic uncertainty and concerns around mental health are quite clear. So, you know, 28% worrying about having a major worry about a family member or friend's mental health, and 22% about their own mental health, and 11.2% around their financial situation and losing their job. What you can see across the whole survey is obviously the people who are more economically active at the moment, so in employment, have a much sharper concern around some of the financial situation. But as I said, the same patterns in villages and across Renfrewshire there. This is quite an important set of questions about how is your household managing financially. So again, these are Renfrewshire-wide stats, but on the whole, they tell us that people are managing financially less well across the board. So in this area, there are more people managing quite well than average. So more people reporting that they're managing better in the villages to the rest of Renfrewshire, which you might expect. In the data that's come through so far, there is a bit of a overrepresentation of retired people, older people and retired people, which I think is probably quite an important consideration when looking at financial concern. That's not to say that there's not a set of economic concerns for retired and older people, but perhaps some of the economic uncertainty arising from the pandemic might be felt slightly differently. So that's why I keep those caveats there around it just being interim data. But the picture ultimately is that people are managing less well, even though they're doing slightly better in the villages. Really important question that was asked was around if there's help that people feel they currently need, but they're not receiving. So this graph gives you that again, blue for the villages, green for Renfrewshire, and you'll see that there's no areas where the villages has got unmet need that eclipses that of the Renfrewshire picture. But again, those biggest items are, they're still notable. So help with a health condition unrelated to COVID-19, and that echoes some of the national picture around people maybe sat worrying about their health, but feeling like now is not the time to go to the GP, or experiencing delays in health service treatment. A bit of concern there about help with mental health, and also financial is those other kind of key pictures there in terms of advice on benefits or financial help to pay for essentials. So again, slightly better picture for the villages, but still some of the same key themes there. This is a set of graphs around happiness and anxiety. So the survey asked people, compared with how they felt on a typical day before the start of March, do they feel a lot or less more happy and a lot or less more anxious? That's happiness there on the left and anxiety there on the right. And as you might expect, the vast majority of people are reporting that they are less happy and more anxious than before. Again, you can see slightly less keenly felt in the villages, but still the same patterns of increased unhappiness and anxiety, which would connect to some of the mental health concerns that are raised in other parts of the survey and other research as well. The next series of graphs are what I would describe as their kind of neighbourhood indicators. So we're asking people about how they feel about where they live and the people that live there. These graphs look a bit confusing, sorry about that. But essentially what I've done is I've included all the local partnerships there so you can see the fluctuation in answers. The villages is the yellow bar in all cases, and the Renfrewshire average, as it were, is in that kind of blue line. So if you're looking for an easy comparison between this local partnership area and the Renfrewshire, you're looking at the yellow bar against the blue line there. So these are about how people feel about their neighbourhood as a place to live, their satisfaction, and also whether they feel that the local area is safe. You'll see there are slightly higher levels of satisfaction in the neighbourhood and feelings of safety in the villages. Another pattern you'll see with some of the neighbourhood things is there's greater strength of feeling. So you see that agree strongly on the left has a sharper uptick for the villages. So there's a more kind of favourable result for the villages, but also there's greater strength of feeling around whether the neighbourhood is a satisfactory and safe place to live. These are about how people are with each other in the local area. So this is a neighbourhood where people are kind to each other on the left, and on the right this is a neighbourhood where most people can be trusted. Again, you'll see the same pattern, more positive or favourable results for the villages, but also you can see that strength of feeling there. So here in agree strongly, you can see that outstanding uptick there in yellow, same over here, compared to some of the other local partnerships. And as you can see, you know, when it comes to strength of feeling around this, there's quite a big fluctuation between different areas in Renfrewshire. So that may well be of note, and generally lower levels of dissatisfaction, which you'll see here on the right-hand side of the graphs. This next set of questions are around places, meeting places, places for people to meet and places for people to socialise. So on the left, there are welcoming places and opportunities to meet new people, and on the right, there are places where people can meet up and socialise. Again, a bit more positive, probably a little bit closer to the average here. Still, people agreeing strongly or tending to agree, maybe not as much strength of feeling as some of the other indicators. So you see strongly agrees closer to the average, and then there's that uptick there in tend to agree, and much lower levels of dissatisfaction here, you'll see on those kind of right side of those bars. So on the whole, people in the villages generally tending to agree that there are welcoming places where people can meet up and socialise. Another two here, this is about how people from our neighbourhood from different backgrounds get on well together, and also on the right there, if I was alone and I needed help, I could rely on someone in this neighbourhood to help me. You'll see here in the different backgrounds get on well together. Again, there's a big kind of outstanding tick there for the villages, so almost double the amount of people really strongly agreeing that this is a neighbourhood where people from different backgrounds get on well together. So a more favourable picture there, strength of feeling around that, and probably closer to the average here for if I was alone and I needed help, I could rely on someone to help me. And this is the last one of those neighbourhood type slides. So this one is about the extent to which people feel they can influence public decisions, and then also people's views on whether local people take action to help improve the neighbourhood. So you'll see here in terms of influencing decisions, I would say the villages is not far off the Renfrewshire picture, which is most people kind of neither agreeing nor disagreeing, very few people agreeing strongly, a sort of ambivalent response there, both for Renfrewshire and the villages around the ability to influence public services. But you'll see the picture on the right is quite different in terms of where people are asked whether local people take action to help improve the neighbourhood. And if you look here at the agree strongly, you'll see the response for the villages is really, really high in terms of people agreeing strongly that local people in the villages area take action to help improve their neighbourhoods. So a bit of an outlier there, which might be of interest. So that's just some of the data. I know that was a lot of graphs. I'm sorry if you don't like graphs very much. I'm happy to kind of pick them apart a bit more if that's helpful. I just lastly wanted to touch on some of the listening events. So the listening events were facilitated by Engage. As I said, Alan may wish to kind of contribute on his experience of some of this, but very much about talking to organisations that are working with a range of people across Renfrewshire and targeting some of that around particular groups, particularly around kind of equality groups and women's groups, where some of the research is telling us that some of those impacts may be disproportionate. But the discussions with local partnerships are also a really important part of this listening too. So this just provides us with a bit of richer information about what people are reporting and what people are seeing on the ground. And it very much reinforces, I guess, some of that initial data. So people are telling us that people on low incomes or who are in more insecure employment are feeling the impact of COVID in a disproportionate way. Food insecurity and fuel poverty are being seen as particular issues, and there is high ongoing demand for community-based support, which has been sustained essentially. You know, Renfrewshire feels like it's been in level 4 for forever, and there's not really been a drop-off in demand for some of these. There is a kind of increasing complexity and needs of that demand. People with COVID, as the infection rates have risen, you know, we're now having to work with people who are having to self-isolate, which brings with it a whole range of issues around how we support people, but also coming across a lot of people who are not in contact with any services or have any other support networks. So people who are quite significantly isolated when they need help. Digital exclusion is a key issue, as I'm sure you can imagine. I think online provisions worked really well for some organisations, but there still are significant issues around some people being able to access and engage through online means. And organisations are reporting to us their real concern around loneliness and isolation and the impact that this has on mental health and well-being, really for all age groups, but young people have come up as a particular area of concern for a number of groups. We've also had quite a bit of feedback that specific groups are experiencing potentially greater impact as a result of the pandemic. So Black and minority ethnic communities, women and carers, there's certainly a feeling from a lot of organisations that some of these groups are bearing the brunt of some of the worst impacts. Some of that will be quite closely connected to the socioeconomic situation as well. I hope that was helpful as a bit of an overview. I guess just points for discussion that I'd be interested in understanding are what have been the impacts of COVID-19 in your communities. Are some of these trends things that you recognise, or has that been felt differently? And as I said, this may well influence some of the local priorities previously identified. So I guess just to open that up to the local partnership to see whether that is something that you feel needs to be influenced or changed, particularly before we move into another grant round, believe it or not. Thank you very much. Hopefully I haven't talked for too long. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm going to end the slideshow now, so I should be able to see everyone again.
Thanks, Annabelle. We've got a few questions. I think, Alan, did you maybe want to come in the listening events and discuss that? And then if we could have the questions after that and move on to the discussion, that would be great.
Yep. Thanks, Chair. Everybody hear me okay? My connection sometimes not so good at night. It was really just to say the presentation, I think, really covers a wide variety of voices in there, and the listening events obviously added to that. I suppose I'm trying to sort of look at some of the potential positives as we move hopefully towards recovery. The sharing of the good work that's been done across Renfrewshire. Part of Engage's job is really to go back to government and other funders and talk a lot about the successes of the community response. And no doubt there's been some excellent community responses that we'll be pleased to tell people about, including the work within obviously the hubs that were established by the local authority and RLL, and a lot of volunteers coming through Engage's ranks. And that work of the hubs has obviously been picked up by some sort of major sort of think tank folk through the Carnegie Trust, for example, UK wide. I've looked at these hubs and seen them as being great examples about how to manage services in community settings. But the 2 points, Chair, I'd just like to sort of really pick up from the listening events with the community organisations is one of the things that the pandemic's led to is obviously an awful lot of digital work. And we're hearing different types of voices because people are attending virtual meetings a lot of the time. There's a lot of change in voices there. We're hearing voices we don't normally hear. And I think going forward, we need to hold on to some of that mechanism. Hopefully we all get back into rooms meeting with people, but we really want to make sure we keep these kind of virtual platforms available for people to engage and work with us. And then the final one is really just that in Renfrewshire, I think everybody without fail at these listening events have talked about partnership working, how important partnership working has been to the response. And we were lucky, I think, in Renfrewshire, we had existing partnerships that really helped accelerate that. I think everybody's keen to build on that accelerated partnership, that sense of connection that's had to be there in this time of crisis. We really need to try and hold on to that to make sure we make even more sense of the recovery going forward. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, I agree with your point on the virtual platforms. I think we definitely need to keep that going ahead. I think as much there's obviously been a lot of difficulties that have came with it, but it's something that's opened up access for a lot of people. It's helped a lot of people out, and I think, yeah, going forward, that's something that we need to make sure that we maintain. But absolutely, I would love to get back to having meetings in rooms again and being able to see people face to face. Okay, questions. We've got Councillor Sheridan.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Annabelle, for an excellent presentation. Annabelle, you spoke earlier about the increasing demand on food banks and the excellent work that a lot of volunteers are getting involved in. But can I make a special mention of an organisation as EBI Unite, which EBI is for Erskine, Bishopton and Inchinnan, who have been through, shall I say, a torrid year of trying to get a base in order to store their stuff, which is important, but also for access to the clients who want to use the food banks. Currently, they're located in two areas. One is in the Barnhill Farm in Houston, which no public transport whatsoever can get to, so therefore the clients are finding it extremely difficult to get there, so they're dependent on volunteers to deliver the stuff to the clients, which is proven somewhat problematic. And they're also operating out of Bargarden Community Centre, where they've been for a long time, but most of that time they've been unwelcomed, shall we say. And the reason I'm raising it is to see, Annabelle, I know you talk about reaching out to people and listening to people, and I wonder if it's all possible if you could meet with the organisers or the volunteers even at EBI to see what assistance, if any, that we can offer them during these difficult pandemic times. It's because they are suffering badly, and financially, more importantly, but logistically, it's just not working out for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's not this local partnership, so I think we maybe shouldn't focus on it too much, but I absolutely agree, Jim. I visited EBI. They're providing a great service to the community. As far as I was aware, Annabelle, the council had already been in discussions with EBI, but I'll let you come in on this.
Yeah, happy to, and it may well be that Alan can also kind of contribute. Alan and I have worked really closely since the beginning of the kind of COVID pandemic to work with a range of groups around providing support, EBI being one of them. So Jackie's been a regular attender of our network, Community Food Response Network, since the beginning, and I've been in a number of discussions with Jackie about the premises situation, but I'm happy to pick that up with Jackie again. And we did have some discussions at the Erskine Bishopton and Shinnan and Langbank local partnership as well. I think Alan can confirm this maybe with a nod, but I think Jackie's also been involved in some of the listening events so far, so that has been part of that kind of community impact assessment, and certainly had some feedback since doing this round of local partnerships that groups would be quite keen that we go out and understand a bit more of that local picture and display that in the full report that will go to council in March. And I've given my kind of commitment to do that, and I've certainly spoken to Jackie since then as well. So happy to go out and revisit that with her. But for your reassurance, you know, been working with a wide range of groups across Renfrewshire right from the beginning, and tried to facilitate, be supportive as possible, but also make sure that those experiences are fed through the community impact assessment too. You know, particularly, I guess, for this local partnership, I would say the Lochwinnock Food Committee, we've been working really close with them. They've been doing really great kind of local work around food insecurity too, as well as a lot of kind of village efforts too. So it's been really varied across the piece. But you're quite right, a huge community response there.
Okay, thanks, Annabelle. I think we had Sterling, if you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thanks very much for the presentation. It was really interesting. And I appreciate that you've went to all this effort to collate all of that data, but I was just wondering if you'd be able to give me some information on where exactly you, where you pulled all the information from. I think some of the individual research might be really useful in helping target disproportionately impacted groups specifically.
Yep. So do you mean in terms of the kind of initial data piece?
Yeah, just in when you talk about young people and stuff like that who have been disproportionately impacted, I was just wondering where that sort of information came from.
Yeah.
And if it's being published.
Yeah, so it will be. So I'm happy to kind of circulate. I know a lot of elected members will have seen the interim results of the community impact assessment, but a number of community members might not have been. So some of those initial headlines were reported at council in December, and I'm happy to share a link with the local partnership where you can see those papers. This piece of work will head towards kind of fuller community impact assessment that will be published at council in March, I believe, so that will be available there. In terms of some of the feedback around young people, that comes from the listening events, that has involved a range of different organisations. Alan probably knows more of the detail than me about who's been invited to some of those. Some of that kicked off from some of the national social renewal work, and some of that then continued locally. So I'm not totally sure off the top of my head exactly what list of organisations they were, but I think, Alan, there were a number of youth organisations invited to be part of those conversations.
There certainly was, Annabelle, and I think, Sterling, it's fair to say people come along with an understanding that young people are being adversely affected because of the point of life they're involved in, and we've seen a rising increase of sort of mental health issues being raised around young people as well. So in some respects, some of this is an echo pre-COVID through things like organisations like Create and YMCA, etc. But also, obviously, Renfrewshire Youth Voice have been asked along to a number of these events as well over the piece. So it's really just about keeping that conversation going, and it is conversational rather than data driven. So for me at Renfrewshire, we're more interested from an Engaged Renfrewshire point of view, sort of qualitative kind of aspect, what people are telling us, and it's backed up by that quantitative data that Annabelle was able to show you there through some of the listening surveys. But happy to chat regards further in that conversation as much as we possibly can.
Chair, could we ask Annabelle to take the screen down?
I think that has been. Oh, is that it now? I think that's us.
My apologies. I thought that I had done it. My apologies.
Okay, that's great. Sterling, did you want to come back in, or are you quite happy with that?
No, I was quite happy with that. Thanks very much. I'll keep a lookout for it in the report in March, and I'm aware that my organisation has been involved in some of the conversations, but I was just interested if there was any quantitative data that could be shared at the moment. But thank you very much, both of you.
Great, thank you. Okay, and Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Natalie. One of the questions asked by Annabelle was, are people able to take action to improve their neighbourhood? And I'm wondering how the impact of the virus has affected that, or is that maybe all what it was all about? I know that some community councils haven't been meeting. I'd be interested to know within the group here if how many community councils have not been meeting. And it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention the Bridge Weir Community Council hasn't been meeting, and partly because of the recent passing of their chairman, Gordon Anderson, who will be sadly missed. But I'm wondering, perhaps we need to be offering more assistance to the groups that aren't meeting. I know there are obviously some. I'd like to know what Annabelle can offer in answer to that.
It's certainly something that we could focus on, perhaps as a partnership to the groups within our area. Annabelle, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not totally sure which, particularly around community councils, who's been operating and who's not been operating. I think it's fair to say that across a whole range of community organisations, some have been able to respond and adapt quite significantly to be able to meet the results of the pandemic, and for others, some of the logistical challenges have been kind of more pressing. So I don't know about whether people feel more or less local action has been taken as a result of the pandemic. As always, I think if there are groups that need assistance to meet, probably what I would do is direct them towards Engage Renfrewshire, who are probably best placed to provide support to third sector organisations and have been doing that work in helping the third sector and community groups to adapt to the current climate as much as possible. But if there are particular groups, of course, happy to enter discussions with them. But heads up, I'd probably be passing them over to Alan as soon as I could.
Yeah, I think it would be good just to see. I mean, I'm not sure if it's something that we could do as a local partnership to perhaps write, maybe not tonight, to discuss this tonight, because we have some people not here. But if we could write to our local group, the groups involved, just asking if they're aware of any groups that are having difficulties meeting given the current circumstances, and if they do require any support, so that we can sort of flag them to that. Thanks, James. I've got Councillor Cameron.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody here from Elderslie Community Council or Johnson Community Council, so I just thought I would let you know that neither of the community councils have been meeting, but they've still been active on social media and by email. You know, we're keeping in touch, but it was just to make you aware of that, Natalie. Councillor Dawn.
Thanks, Councillor Cameron. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, for all we know, the groups might not want support. They might still be functioning, just albeit on a kind of scaled down. But it would be good to certainly ask. I have Councillor Doig. Audrey.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I know I normally attend 3 community councils: Houston, Brookfield and Linwood. The Houston one is doing meetings, but they're doing it on Zoom, and we're not allowed to basically go into Zoom to go on to any meetings. So that's why I just put in a monthly report to the actual group so that they can put it online. But the Brookfield one is doing the same as Elderslie. They are emailing amongst themselves should any issues come up. But they're not actually holding any kind of meetings. And the same is for the Linwood one as well. Linwood are responding to emails and questions, but they're not actually holding any meetings either. And it might be that the people that are on the boards of these community councils don't have good computer knowledge or social media knowledge, but they do respond to emails. So I don't know if it's a big problem, but I know that it's patchy elsewhere. So I think you'll probably find there's more not meeting than actually are. So it's very varied wherever you are.
Thanks, Audrey. I've got a few hands up here. Andy Doig, Councillor Doig.
Aye, thanks, Natalie. It's really just to give another update as other councillors like Audrey and Councillor Cameron were doing in relation to their community councils and their activities over the lockdown. There's 4 community councils in Ward 9. Johnston had 1 physical meeting, socially distant, about last autumn to address a local issue. Howard has had no meetings, but I think they're keeping, they're emailing each other and keeping the committees keeping active in that sense about local issues. Kilbarchan has had no online meetings, but it started to have specific meetings in relation to road and traffic issues with both the councillors and council officers, which is great to see. Lochwinnock has been the most active. They've been having monthly Zoom meetings and trying to conduct their business on Zoom, and they're very active just now in relation to both planning issues and the imminent loss of the post office in the village. So that's what's happening really in Ward 9.
Thanks, Councillor Doig. I'll just take, sorry, I've got quite a few questions here. I'm just trying to get everybody in order. Ross Anderson.
I would just support what Andy was saying in Lochwinnock. We've been meeting regularly and we've a number of issues to address, and we've been supporting nearly 6 initiatives in growing our own food, etc. So we're active.
Fantastic, thanks for that. Nigel?
Councillor Don, thank you. I was just coming on to say, as Councillor Doig said, Houston Community Council are meeting on a monthly basis and doing what we can as near normal. But in terms of which community councils are meeting and which aren't, I just thought I might point you in the direction. Anne McNaughton emailed out, I think it was early January, asking community councils whether they were meeting or not. So, and she got at least a dozen responses to that. So if you're looking for an up-to-date list of who's meeting and who's not, I think Anne can point you in the right direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. John, Councillor Hood, I'm not sure, have you got a question?
Yeah, well,
yeah.
It's sort of, first of all, I'd like to sort of mirror the other councillors, but we also seem to be sort of missing out the tenants and residents associations, which a lot of them are older people who don't have like which got tablets, so they're not meeting in a way. The younger ones are meeting. I know Speightson are doing quite well, and they're quite active on social media. But one of the questions that I was going to ask, I don't know who can answer it, is it was brought up as part of the Annabelle's presentation, fuel poverty. Is there something that we can look into? Like, so obviously the COVID is everybody's working from home, and the issues with people working at home and the kids at home is creating fuel poverty, and people not being able to afford to pay their bills, and obviously employers are not paying the electricity bills that they're running, like their equipment and the lights and their heating. So is that something that we've looked into, or is that something that we could look into?
Yeah, I'm not sure we'd be able to answer that tonight. I think we might need to get you an answer back for that. Can I bring in one of the officers just to confirm?
I think, yeah, you're absolutely right, Councillor Don. I think we would need to come back on that one in terms of just, again, it comes back to the governance. We've got a degree of flexibility, but we need to be careful about just how far. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we'll come back to that, John. And can I just ask, Councillor Sheridan, I think your hand's been up. I take it you don't have a question? No, No. If once you've had your question, if you don't mind just lowering your hand again, so that if you have another question, I'll know to bring you in. So obviously, I don't see any more hands up just now, but I know we've not really touched on. Oh, sorry, Ross. Sorry, I'll bring you in first, and then I'll say what I was going to say.
Sorry, I didn't put my hand down. No, I've said what I was going to say.
Ah, I thought so. Right, okay, no problem. Okay, well, yeah, we've just not really touched on the priorities, and I think that's quite relevant coming from the presentation. Obviously, we set the priorities for the partnership prior to COVID, and things have life has changed slightly, and we touched on it earlier, but the next grant given the next meeting probably that's going to go ahead will be the grant given again, which is just unbelievable, and our groups probably are going to be in a difficult situation again as to what's happening. Obviously things are getting better, the vaccine's rolling out, and we're seeing that light at the end of the tunnel, but there's still going to be some uncertainty ahead. So I think as a partnership, our priorities just now are focused around connectivity and transport, environment and parks, access to services, facilities and assets, and village identity and character. Now, obviously, I don't want to go on for too much tonight, but if anybody does have, if anyone thinks that we need to maybe focus more on one or two of these than some of the other ones, or if anybody has any ideas for a new priority, something that's kind of focused around what we've been going through for the past year, it just might be good to sort of get that in prior to the next meeting, so that any grants or applications or groups that are working towards that will be able to include them. But obviously, if we think we're covered with what we have, then that's fine. And just before I move on to the comments, I would say, obviously, we don't have to kind of finalise this tonight. The priorities are a rolling thing. We can always discuss things via email. A shorter meeting can be called later on prior to the grant given if we did want to discuss any priorities. It's just to kind of have a quick discussion and get our thinking caps on for what could benefit the villages. So I will bring in Councillor Doig. Councillor Audrey Doig, sorry.
Thanks, convener. I would just like to bring up something that we discussed on Tuesday night at the Johnson and Linwood LAT board. I would like to see that the monies that are given out in grants are used more locally, as in that they're for activities that are going to be within the boundary of the actual Renfrewshire as such. There was an early thing, I don't think it happens so much now, but there was an early thing back in the early days when 13 years ago, I became a councillor, that every pensioners group used to put in for local grants so they could hire a bus and go somewhere outside Renfrewshire and buy fish, teas and all the rest of it as to basically doing that. And it was basically seeing that the money that was getting given was actually not getting spent within the actual area. And I'm not saying that we should be prescriptive on what we actually say in it, but to just give a hint to the local groups that are putting in that we're looking for either, you know, things to be done within Renfrewshire to improve the things for younger children or adults to be in our area, and to encourage local businesses to be involved in basically doing that. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think, is that something that we could sort of focus on or emphasise further in the guidance when we're putting that out for the new applications for this year? I'll just bring in Annabelle.
Yeah, absolutely. You could add it to your priority. I don't think you do have one, but a number of local partnerships have a kind of theme as well. So they've got priorities and maybe a theme that they want to see kind of run through stuff. So that's certainly something that you could put in there. And I guess just to make sure that I've understood correctly, I guess that's about making sure that the money is invested in the local area rather than taken outside. So it's a kind of circular economy thing, really. Is that right?
Yes, that's what I mean. I mean, a scout group could buy a whole load of tents and etc. for, you know, maybe going trips, but the whole point is that the tents and all the equipment in the group would stay in the group to encourage, you know, things that are locally. But we do have a local scout site, as in Lapwing Lodge, you know, that most people, and to begin with, in their junior sections in Scouts would use Lapwing Lodge to begin with. But I wouldn't necessarily say that the equipment wouldn't go to maybe up the West Highland Way, but things like that. But it's basically to be seen to be about improving the group or the organisation's equipment or whatever within the area, and to try and use it within the area and encourage local businesses to help with that.
I'm muted. Sorry about that. I was muted there. Sorry, I misunderstood there. I passed it over to Annabelle, and I think you must have been like, what? Sorry, Councillor Doig, I didn't realise that you meant that to be a priority for this specific partnership. I thought you'd meant that that was more something to be fed into the guidance. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, if that's something that the partnership would agree with, then we can certainly add that. I'll bring in a couple of questions in case that's just in dispute with that or anything. Councillor Hood.
It was just to come on and totally agree with Audrey on that. I think it's in the name, local partnership, and I think that the money needs to be spent locally, as in the groups that are local with that. Thanks.
Okay, I just want to be absolutely clear here, because we've got the kind of circular economy idea, which is where money that's getting spent is getting spent within Renfrewshire, but then we've got sort of groups that aren't necessarily from within the partnership, but that are applying for funding because there's folk in the partnership that benefit, or not, sorry, in the partnership, but in the partnership area that benefit from that. So I just want us to be clear on what it is that we're agreeing to, because obviously if we put limitations in, then it's going to come back when the funds start going through. So Councillor Hood, you're saying that you agree with the sort of concept of the money being spent in Renfrewshire, yeah?
The money being spent in Renfrewshire, but it's got to go. How do you put it? I've always been of the opinion where it's the money has to be sort of local groups. I wasn't too keen in which got all the other groups sort of coming in for the money. I think it needs to be groups, because time's coming up. It's going to be hard, and it's going to be harder for the local groups. And if we have which got other groups coming in, it's going to even be harder. So if you know what I mean there, I think that we discussed this in Tuesday. I think after having a long sort of think about it, the money needs to be spent within Renfrewshire, but it's got to be groups that's within the local partnership. If you understand, might be the long way around, but I think hopefully you know where I'm coming from.
Yep. Okay. I'll come back to that. I'll bring Megan just now.
My mute keeps going on and off. So I was getting very confused from what Councillor Audrey Doig was saying. Is, if I picked her up correctly, she's saying if, for example, Bridge of Weir senior citizens got money, they were only allowed to spend it within our local partnership group, which meant they couldn't go out with the area. They couldn't do a trip up to Glasgow. It would have to be spent either within Renfrewshire or within our local partnership, which means they could only go to Johnston, but that's not our local partnership. They'd have to find somewhere within the villages to spend the money and find a bus group that could take them, who actually was based within our local partnership, or does she mean it can only be spent within Renfrewshire?
Apologies. Councillor Doig, I don't want to answer that for you. I'll bring you in on that. But I think what you'd mean is that there would be a focus on that, but it wouldn't be sort of 100% in the rules. And I think maybe that would be reflected when we're sort of putting the information out about the grants. And obviously as a partnership, when we are giving out the grant, we can we know that that is one of our priorities. But I'll just bring Councillor Doig in to confirm.
Yes, what I mean is that the local group who might be pensioners, who might not, it might be a singing group or whatever, who want to go to a local pantomime, we'd be looking for them to maybe do the one in Paisley, which was within Renfrewshire, rather than spending the money and taking it to Edinburgh or Glasgow or Perth, because keeping the money within the Renfrewshire encourages local creativity and local artistry to basically stay within it. And we've got plenty of local bus companies that are within the Renfrewshire boundaries that would love that to happen for them to get the local business in that as well. So yes, it is I'm not saying it's totally prescriptive, but what we should be putting into the actual thing is that would be our preference. That would be what we'd look at first, that is that local groups are spending locally.
Okay, I think that clarifies that. Thank you. You happy with that, Meg? Okay, David.
Thank you very much. I also was getting confused by the debate that we were having there, and the example that Audrey gave about a local scout group, which I'm very passionate about. If we were applying for tentage for a local scout group, I can guarantee you the tents are not coming from Renfrewshire. The tents will be coming from wherever, but we wouldn't be spending that money locally. So I'm just slightly worried that we're tying ourselves up in a little bit of a knot here, because most equipment that groups will buy won't be from Renfrewshire.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I think again, it's something that I would be wary of putting in black and white. But it's just to have a focus on, like, letting groups know that that is what the partnership focuses on, and that is what would be favourable to seeing money spent locally. Not necessarily even within just the partnership, but within Renfrewshire. But yeah, when things can't be found within Renfrewshire, or they don't exist within Renfrewshire, then obviously there's sort of things that are out with our control and other groups' control. I've got a few questions. I will get you everyone in. Sterling, I'll take you next.
Yeah, I was just looking to clarify a point that Councillor Hood made a couple of minutes ago. Am I correct in my understanding that your suggestion was that the partnership should primarily focus on supporting groups which are geographically located within our partnership in comparison to those which are located in wider Renfrewshire?
I'll let Councillor Hood respond to that.
I've always been the advocate of it's the local partnership or local grant boards, and the money should stay local. But as we've been doing through the grants before, and we've done in the past one like that, we done the local groups first, and then if there was money left, we went on to the other groups. So sort of yes.
Sterling, do you want to come back in? I think what I would say is, again, we've always been hesitant in the past to put that in black and white, because we understand that, as I said previously, there might be groups that benefit a lot of people that come from the partnership that exist with the partnership area, and it would be difficult to just sort of say no, absolutely not, you can't have funding. But then I do appreciate Councillor Hood's point as well, where a lot of the funding could be going elsewhere, which has happened. That's what we're trying to get away with from, obviously, with the local partnerships in opposition to the LACs. But yeah, Sterling, I don't know if you want to come back into that.
Yeah, I was just going to make the point that, for example, I know a number of local community groups, my charity included, have specific projects that focus on local areas, even though they are not themselves based within them. So, for example, we have a project at the moment exclusively benefiting Gallaghill, but we're located somewhere completely different. And I think it would just make more sense if we viewed things as to the impact that they have on the people in their community rather than where they're from initially. But I do appreciate your point. But I think that that's ultimately a decision that we can make when we're considering the benefits of specific funding applications.
Brilliant, thank you. So James McLaren.
Thank you, Councillor Dunn, convener. So yeah, with regard to what Councillor Audrey Doig has suggested, I think we're wrapping ourselves up in difficulty here. An aspiration maybe, but not a rule. As Mr. David Blair has said, the tents probably wouldn't come from Renfrewshire, they might come from AMG and Port Glasgow. And mention of Lapwing Lodge earlier. Lapwing Lodge is actually in East Renfrewshire anyway, it's not in Renfrewshire. So you're going to affect a whole number of different organisations by making a rule like this, and I think it would be best to decide on the application, each one under its own merit. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I think the way the conversation's going, it seems like we are quite sceptical about putting this in black and white. Ross, I'll bring you in, sorry. And then I've got Councillor Doig, I've got you as well.
Well, I'm very concerned at the kind of conversations that are going on. And I would support the last speaker. You might have an aim for spending the majority of money, etc., in Renfrewshire, but I don't think you can be restrictive. You'll spoil a lot of activities of existing organisations. I think we've got to be very careful, and I agree with you, it should not be in black and white.
Thanks, Ross. And finally, I'll bring in Andy.
Thanks, Kavina. I think that to add some light to the discussion, we had a similar discussion. Councillor Audrey and Councillor Hood and Councillor Sheridan will be aware. We had a similar discussion at the Johnston Linwood LAP on Monday, and what they decided was that we should try and look to a set of broad criteria, whereas when we're dealing with multi-Renfrewshire applications, we should try and make sure that the majority of the money goes, as Councillor Hood and Councillor Audrey Doig have said, to communities, local communities within our area. Because the problem with a lot of the multi-lac applications, and I hate to pick on a particular sport, but the Paisley basketball comes to mind. Now, in some cases, there's some sports clubs which are primarily based in Paisley, which must be able to appeal to the National Federation for funds or the National Lottery. And I wouldn't say that we should be the first port of call for them in relation to funding. And there's a lot of instances of this where clubs and societies may have very, very little to do with the social fabric of the villages. And yet these organisations come to us every year looking for money. And I think the role of the Villages LAP, you're trying to redress decades of lack of investment in village communities by Renfrewshire Council. And it doesn't matter who's controlled the council. There's been a consistent and a persistent lack of investment where most money has been directed towards Paisley. Renfrew has got some, Johnston tends to get some of the crumbs, and the villages have got practically nothing. And that's been the case for decades. So I think we've got to look to the future and have specific criteria which are broad enough that can be flexible, as Stirling McGee and Ross Anderson have said, but strong enough to make sure that most of our money goes to where it should be, which is in our own village communities. Because let's remember, there's LAPs that cover other parts of Renfrewshire. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of the comments that have been said tonight. I think that we obviously, we have the power. We are the local partnership and we are the ones that decide and vote on the grant given at the end of the day. I think if these are things that we want to focus on, that is something that we certainly can, and that will be minuted tonight. And yeah, I mean, we could certainly look into drawing up some further guidance for this, or not further guidance to get put out, but amongst ourselves, in terms of what we are focusing on for the multi-area applications or the Out With Renfrewshire applications or something like that. But again, that's more based on sort of our priorities going forward. I think, again, obviously, we run the risk of perhaps being oversubscribed again this year, although we don't know. But these discussions will probably need to come up again if we are. Can I just bring in the officers to talk about some of the sort of guidance around this, please? Annabelle, I think you had wanted to come in. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Don. So, just a couple of notes, I guess, on guidance versus priorities and the difference between those two things and how we use them. So the guidance for all the funds is essentially a combination of the things that we have to do, so the things that form our grant conditions, types of organisations we can and can't support, types of activities we can and can't support as a council. That underpins some of our guidance. And also in the guidance are some very clear set principles. So for example, it's very explicitly put in the guidance around local partnership grants nowadays that you need to apply to, for example, the villages, and you need to clearly demonstrate how your project benefits people in the villages. So what the guidance doesn't do at the minute, as you know, is say you need to be from the villages or your base needs to be in the villages, but what you do need to say is how it meets the criteria. And we do that for lots of the reasons that you've kind of already discussed. Based on that, we obviously structured the papers slightly different this year. So as officers, in a very light touch way, we indicated where we thought that, for example, if we receive an application for funding and it makes no reference to the villages whatsoever, that would go in the section where we say, we don't really think it's relevant to this partnership, or it doesn't meet the priorities because it just doesn't make reference to the villages. And organisations take very varied approaches in how fastidious they are about the guidance, essentially. What the local priorities then do is give you a boundary for discussion as a local partnership to say, well, actually, this is what we're talking about. You know, we're really into, for example, village identity and character, and this is all about a kind of specific village, a specific fate or a specific landmark, and that allows you then to give some more flexibility about how you then make your decisions. In terms of some of these suggestions, they would be in, I think, I would say they need to sit within your local priorities to influence your decision making. So not about saying you absolutely can't or you can apply. That sits within the guidance, which would need to go to a council board to be changed. What we're talking about is whether there are things that you can put in your local priorities that might influence decision making. What I would say in terms of practice is, if you want organisations to do a particular thing, I would advise being explicit about it in your priorities. Otherwise, you won't get it in the application. So if you want people to try and spend locally as much as possible, you can try and score that retrospectively once the applications come in. But if nobody knows that's what you want to do, then you won't get that kind of content. If you put something in your priorities, and I'm just using this as a very vague example, saying, as much as possible, we want applications for funding to support the local economy in Renfrewshire and specifically in the villages, then that gives organisations the opportunity to put in their application, well, we're going to buy our tents at the local shop and we're going to move our trip to X place in Renfrewshire, and it gives them a chance to demonstrate that, and then you have that evidence to play with, I guess, as a local partnership. So just a couple of notes there around, I think what we're talking about here is not changing the guidance for the local partnerships to provide reassurance that they already quite clearly say this money needs to be spent in the villages, and that's the whole point of it. And we reinforced that in the move to local partnerships. But what the local priorities do is give you a chance to explicitly say more about what you want to see. And where organisations are really good in their applications, they will look at those local priorities before they decide what that project looks like, and then they will tell us in their application how they're going to deliver that for you. And then you obviously get that information in your summaries to support your decision making. I hope that was helpful in terms of just how some of that works in practice.
Yeah, thanks, Annabelle. Yeah, I think if we remember last year at the grant giving, it wasn't a case of that every application had to fit into every single one of the priorities. Although if any applications didn't fit into any of the priorities, they weren't even considered. So if the partnership is minded, then we could certainly add that as one of our priorities, that we would prefer a focus on Renfrewshire, of supporting the economy in Renfrewshire. But obviously that doesn't make it an absolute sort of that has to happen. We can still assess applications that maybe don't do that on sort of other aspects. So would the board be minded to go? Oh, sorry, Oliver, and I'll take Councillor Steele after Oliver.
Sorry to cut in there, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think that actually what Annabelle was suggesting around the use of the word demonstrate would be useful. I think because the partnership up until now has frequently been oversubscribed, and the likelihood is it will be again, this would actually give additional guidance to people making applications about the fact that this local area partnership was minded to prioritise applications that could demonstrate the local area partnership, that they're either based in the local area partnership area, or that they will spend within it, or that they'll directly contribute to it in some kind of way. And you'll probably raise the bar of the types of applications that you're getting in, but it certainly gives a bit more flexibility for the partnership in making the ultimate funding decisions, which have been difficult up until now. So I hope that doesn't hinder rather than help, but I think actually that being really clear to potential applications about being able to demonstrate that, I think would be useful.
Yeah, I think that would help, but I would also like to be clear that just now that when we get to the application stage or the grant given stage, that if it is a case that an application are doing something out with Renfrewshire because they simply cannot do it within Renfrewshire, then that would be considered as fine. It's not a case of it just gets taken away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Andy, sorry, Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Natalie. You've actually just touched on it in your summary there. My concern is, while I think everyone would agree with the principle, my concern is in practice, the law of unintended consequences might kick in, and we start disadvantaging local groups who might otherwise have applied, but who might not think they're spending their money sufficiently local. But you've made it quite clear that it's not, and in fairness, Councillor Audrey-Doig said not prescriptive in her very first sentence, as long as there's still the flexibility there to deal with applications on an individual basis, then fair enough.
Okay, great. Well, I'm happy for that to go ahead, unless anybody has any other comments on it. As I say, it's just another thing that can guide us when we're making the application awards. It's non-prescriptive, as we've said. So, do we have any other questions? No. Councillor Cameron agrees. Thank you for that. All right, brilliant. Councillor Doig, did you just pop your hand up?
I did. It's really a question. These are very broad questions, but there's two issues I think that we're waiting on the council to deliberate upon, and indeed the Scottish Parliament. Because of COVID, these things have been put on hold. The first was, can we have a discussion convener in an ongoing discussion about the future of village bus provision? I think that's one point. Now the council's taking a clear, united view in that, and we're waiting on the options that the transport bill in Edinburgh has opened up, so that the council can follow up. I know the audit board that Councillor Binks is the convener of has did various pieces of work, and I submitted submissions to them, and everything's been put on hold, but these things aren't going to improve. So that's one thing. I think we need to look specifically about where we are with village bus provision and the changes that we might be able to take advantage of. The second is a plea to have a discussion about how we stop the loss of village services. Now, Lochwinnock is currently engaged in a fight to save its post office provision. Bridge of Weir in your own ward has already been through that road. There'll be other villages, I'm sure, that, you know, if they do still have post office provision, they might be under threat. I mean, one of the options the Lochwinnock Community Council has approached the post office about is a mobile post office service, which is the case in some parts of England, where we could maybe hook up a number of different villages. But I think because services like that are contracting and they're so important to village communities, can we maybe a broad discussion about village services and how we try and keep them? You're on mute.
Sorry. Still learning. Yeah, sorry, absolutely. I'll see if anybody else wants to come in on that in a second. I'll start with your transport bus services. So yeah, obviously I'm not sure what we can decide on that as a partnership tonight, but I think I'm in agreement that we need bus services back. We need adequate bus services back. And the Transport Scotland, the transport bill, sorry, I know was hoping to give councils more flexibility over potentially running their own services. Get away from the services that we currently have that are just not worthwhile. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure as a partnership if it would be something to seek an update from the council on where we are with that, so that we can start discussing that, because obviously that is one of our priorities as the partnership. Well, it kind of fits into a couple. Obviously, we've got connectivity and transport, but also access to services and facilities, etc. So yeah, I'd be happy to seek an update on that as the partnership. And I'll bring Councillor, Audrey Doig in just now.
Thanks, Convener. Can I just say that I think we should ask our MSPs to join in that conversation and invite them in, because they have a lot of power at Holyrood over the transport policy. And some parts of the transport policy stops the smaller companies basically making good profitable routes, because one of the things I found out when we were discussing the lack of services in Houston, particularly, and going through Linwood into Johnson, when they were taking out, McGill's were taking away the services, there is a regulation that if a bus company or SPT run a present route, no other company can run on the roads that they do. Now, that makes it very difficult in some of the villages that don't have a lot of routes in and out for them, if they should wish to get together to do a community bus service, to actually offer something. And the other thing is that maybe the Scottish Government, who acknowledge that there's communication and transport problems in smaller and outlying places, is that they should give grants to young or new enterprises to set up these bus companies, because it's very expensive, because the buses have got to meet very high environmental levels, which means that the buses that they buy have got to be new age buses. They can't use anything really at second hand. And the other thing is that the mechanics and the machinery that they have to use for the card, the transport card that anybody over the age of 60 uses, is very expensive to put in each bus that they run as well. So even if they were going to maybe run 4 buses in a circular, I mean, that's 4 brand new buses and 4 of the expensive tills that they have to use on the buses as well. That maybe we should be asking the MSPs if they could come in and basically ask these questions, or maybe try and look at new changes to the transport policies that we have in Holyrood to help councils like ourselves that have very rural routes.
Okay, thanks, Audrey. That's good points. Do we have any other comments on the transport issue? I keep putting my own hand up, sorry. Any other comments on that, sorry? No, I don't believe so. Right, okay. Well, we can certainly make inquiries about that and start, yeah, because I mean, I'm in agreement. I think as a local partnership, obviously we've had difficulties. It's been a difficult time, but we've not other than the grant given, we've not sort of had much progress or seen much progress, obviously because we've because of everything that's going on, but it would be nice to start working on something substantial as a partnership. Your next point, Andy, was the loss of village services. You touched on, obviously, Bridge of Weir Post Office that's now obviously been taken over by the community. I think in Bridge of Weir we were quite lucky over the period of COVID that we did have a lot of sort of small businesses and shops that we could kind of sustain ourselves, but I'm not sure if other communities were kind of as I wouldn't say lucky, but had that same sort of community support, I would say. Does anybody have any comments on or want to come in on the village services? All right, I'm not seeing any comments. Andy, what do you think? How do we?
Well, I mean, I think what's happening. I mean, I have to commend Lochranna Community Council, and Ross Anderson's aware and of the details of the campaign, because they're trying to look at various options, whether it be persuading another local business to take on the franchise, as I said, a mobile post office, a community post office that might be in a council-owned building, or possibly even somehow helping using MyBus to try and help transport people to the post office, whether it's in Johnston or Kilbirnie. And I think these are different ways we need to do this, because let's be honest, I mean, in the last 2-3 months, major banks like the TSB have had major closures in Renfrewshire and East Renfrewshire, really significant closures. And I happened to get a letter from the one in TSB in Johnston, where I've got a small account, and they said, but don't worry, you can still use a card at the post office. That Lochranna lost its bank about 5 years ago, and I managed to get a mobile service for them there. So other villages will be at different stages. Some may already have lost everything, but we want to try and stop that, because these amenities are really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think to sort of take this on across the whole partnership is maybe difficult for us as a group, but obviously we all know, we know what's going on in our areas, something that we can bring to the partnership, and if there's anything that we can do, whether that's getting involved in it, then I'm obviously more than happy to look into that. Yeah, I'm. Does anybody have any other comments on that? No. Okay, right. Thank you. Thank you all for your points, for your discussion, and for coming along tonight. As I say, it was really nice to see you all, and it's good to just keep these up. So if what I said earlier about the priorities, that stands. We've had a discussion tonight, but obviously if any members have anything that they think of tonight when the meeting's over, by all means get in touch and let us know, because if it's something that could help local groups in the lead up to the next grant given, then we by all means want to go forward with that, whether that's, as I say, chatting via email or if another meeting's necessary. So take care, everyone, until the next meeting, which you will be informed about.
Vote of thanks to the convener.
Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
It's nice to see all these happy faces.
Thanks, Councillor Dunn.
Thank you.
Thanks
Take
a
care,
lot.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.